I want to turn now to Soledad O'Brien. She's the executive producer and director of Black and Blue, which is part of her Black in America series on CNN. It focuses on the New York City Police Department and the Eric Garner case. You, Soledad, actually used this incident in New York as to kind of set the stage for this documentary to kind of survey what's going on in America. What did you find?
You know, it's interesting, even though the killing of Eric Garner opens our documentary, I think anybody who thinks that what is happening right now is only about Eric Garner or is only about Michael Brown is really missing what is happening in Black America. It was fascinating to hear the chief talk about what they're focused on. He used the words community, he talked about culture, he talked about transforming how you interact with people. What you're actually realizing is that those aren't the words that Commissioner Bratton used. He talked about retraining, he talked about cameras. It's a different philosophy. African Americans feel that they are treated differently in the criminal justice system. They are treated differently under the law. There is this aggressive targeting of Black people that doesn't happen in white communities. And it's that anger over so many years that is really percolating up now.
Do you think that's a valid feeling, that they are being treated differently?
Look at the statistics. If you look in New York City at stop and frisk, we measured between 2000, these are police numbers, but we looked at them for our documentary. Between 2002 and 2012, there were 5 million stops. 83% of those stops were Blacks and Latinos. 90% of those people who were stopped, 90%, that did not move on to an arrest. It did not move on even to a summons. Those people had done nothing. So 90% of the Blacks and Latinos that were stopped in stop and frisk in New York City didn't do anything. Imagine what that does psychically to a culture if you fit the description, which means you're Black, male, 19 to 25.
Well, were most of those stops, when they stopped, were those in high crime areas?
Often in high crime areas, absolutely.
So you wouldn't see that as justification, that you might operate differently in areas where there are lots of crimes than in areas where there are relatively no crimes?
I think the challenge is that it's not being applied proportionally. For example, if you are arresting and stopping people who are, where many of them haven't done anything, you create a culture in that community, even a high crime community, where people feel like they are being criminalized, even those, as we saw in our documentary, who haven't done anything. We had a young man we talked to named Keyshawn who's been stopped 100 times, 100 times at least. And he's been stopped in front of his college, his professors walking by, his classmates going by. At some point, I think it becomes very damaging to these individuals, but also to a community that understands this is unfair.
I saw one interesting, it was interesting to me. You highlight that one major problem, you say, is putting rookie cops in neighborhoods that they're not from.
Yeah, well, it's not even that they're not from necessarily. I think you're putting rookie cops in neighborhoods that are these high crime neighborhoods. We were out in the streets in some of the dangerous neighborhoods 3 days after the rookie cops had been brought onto the force. So
it's somehow almost like school teachers, where people say you ought to put your best teachers in the worst schools, not in the best schools.
Most experienced, exactly. When I asked Commissioner Bratton about that, he used the word, you think of it as a surge, which is a military term, if you will. And I think that what they're trying to do now in the police department, the NYPD, is to match those rookies with people who are more experienced so that they're helping them. You overwhelm an area, but with people who are inexperienced. That has been problematic.
What is the one thing that you would say to people about after doing this work and looking into the problem? What needs to be done here? What's the most important thing to do?
Understanding. When we did our first Black in America documentary 8 years ago, we talked to Black families, whether they were poor, whether they were middle class, or they were rich, and they would tell me about the conversation, which is the conversation they have with their 11 or 12-year-old son, not about how to deal with the police. And white people would say to me, well, I tell my children they should be respectful of the police. And Black people would say, I teach my son how to survive an interaction with the police, regardless of socioeconomic status. That is problematic, and that, I think, is at the core of all of these marches and anger that we've seen.
Soledad O'Brien, nice to have you with us.
Likewise,
Thanks
thank
so much.
You bet.
We're going to be back in a minute.